Morning, everyone, and welcome to Last Week This Morning, where Markham and I recap some of Energy Media's top content from last week. Um, I think we should just jump right in. I know for me, there was one topic that really, really concerned me. You did a story about the Globe and Mail reporter Carrie Tate, talking about her and how she's been, stalked and harassed after expressing some of her work in investigative journalism around Alberta Health Services. And the reason why this got to me is I often worry about you, and I know we've had conversations about it in the past. What happens to people who speak up against, I guess, the incumbents or the status quo in Alberta? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm talking to you from my backyard because I have grandkids in my office. We're on vacation this week. But while they sleep, I get to work, do a little work. And the issue here, MC, is that the and this is not it's not coming from the the political part of the political spectrum that is the center or the left. This is all out on the far right wing. We've seen this before occasionally with some of the CPC members and some of the fringe. I won't even call them news media. The political activists who pretend to be journalists. We saw a video a couple of years ago of Kean Bexte, formerly of Rebel News, and three big burly guys harassing this female reporter. It isn't a common thing yet, but I worry that it's going to become more common. And as for me, you know, I've been getting harassed for years. If you're on social media and you're expressing unpopular views, as some, people accuse me of hating the oil industry in Alberta, accuse me of that all the time. And the irony is that nothing could be further from the truth. As I've said many times on here, we advocate for using bitumen, the oil sands bitumen, to make materials like carbon fiber and asphalt binder instead of sending it off to refineries in Alberta. And the Alberta Innovate says that you get four times as much value doing that. And you'd hire, you'd create a new industry. All of that stuff is supportive of the oil sands long term, like into the next century.
Yeah.
So it's not anti-oil, it's anti-status quo.
Yeah.
And as soon as you start messing with the status
Mhm.
quo, people get upset.
Yeah.
And I've had lately, this isn't anything to do with oil, but we've been doing some stories on Alberta separatism. And I've had people calling me at home and yelling at me and telling me, I'm a liar. And yeah, I just, say respond a little bit and then hang up. I mean, there's not much you can do about it. But the big difference here, and this is the thing that I think we should worry about, not me, is the fact that it's Kerry, and the people like this tend to target female journalists. We saw
Yeah.
Rachel Gilmore at the national level when she worked with the CTV, had a was hugely harassed. And I think I don't know why. Well, I do know why it is. I mean, it's misogynistic, right? I mean, these guys
Yeah.
perceive female journalists to be more vulnerable and more open to bullying, and that's a worrying trend, I think, nationally. It's so anyway. We support whatever the Globe and Mail plans to do, needs to do to protect her safety. And I hope that this is, there's been a lot of spotlight, a lot of publicity about the harassment that she's experienced, and I hope this is the end of it and we don't see any more of it. But I think that would probably be naive, really.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. It is deeply misogynistic. Obviously, there's always a difference between what I would call a telephone tough guy. I get lots of those calls about this show specifically. And also, you've got your Facebook tough guys that behind a keyboard, they're screaming everything. But I think it's when it crosses over into this physical safety in our communities part. it's quite dangerous. And we need to think about the role of journalists in our communities and how they're really bringing us, impartial or learning about what's going on around us. And I know for me, the news and reading the news and watching the news and my little news apps are a big part of my day. And I definitely don't want to lose anyone's perspective, especially a woman's perspective working in that industry. So anyways, for me, the big takeaway here was, this is happening in Canada, and I think it's a bit of a shocker. Anyways, I want to pivot now, and I want to talk about orphan wells. You talked about, landowners being stuck with orphan wells on their property, and to me, this is, this is, and often maybe a more common story than people realize. And also it brings up, the thousands and thousands of orphan wells we have, which is kind of both an environmental and a financial time bomb we've got on our hands.
This is a really, really complex issue, and we delved into it in, I think it was 2023 with a unethical oil series. And you can go on our website, Energi with .media, and read it. But we're not talking about orphan wells. We're talking about those wells that are called inactive.
Okay.
And an orphan well in Alberta is a well that has no owner. The owner the licensee has gone bankrupt. But there are something like 80,000 inactive wells that have been decommissioned, but they haven't been reclaimed. And those are a real source of difficulty. Now, the interview you're referring to was with Dwight Popovich. Now, so that's
Hmm.
somebody I interviewed for the Unethical Oil series. And Dwight has a well on his land that was from a company called Sequoia. And there were quite a number of thousands of wells that, like his, around Alberta when Sequoia went bankrupt. Now, it's a little different because what happened with Dwight is his well is technically orphaned because the company is bankrupt, therefore there's no licensee. But in order for it to be bankrupt and to be reclaimed by the Orphan Well Association, it has to be transferred from the inactive list to the orphan well list.
Yeah.
And and if you've got 80,000 inactive wells and the Orphan Well Association's inventory is like 7 or 8,000, they just don't have the capacity to do all of those wells. So the story that we covered, we interviewed Dwight Popovich, and he has launched a request using the legal help from EcoJustice, and they've asked the ethics commissioner in Alberta to investigate whether or not a Alberta Energy Regulator board member, Dave Yeager, is in a conflict of interest because now he's an old associate of Premier Danielle Smith's, and she appointed him to the board. She's given him a bunch of several contracts to do consulting work prior to this, and one of them was he led a committee that came up with this mature asset strategy, which is an
Hmm.
outgrowth, a variation of the R-Star program, if Albertans will remember this, where you know, the premier, before she became premier, she was an oil and gas lobbyist, and she had this program called R-Star, where there'd be 20,000, it was $20 billion to clean up old wells that the government would pay. It turned out it was a credit program, so the actual cost of the government would have been 6 billion, but it's $6 billion,
Yeah.
to basically reclaim what should be the industry's responsibility. And so that didn't go over well. People were not happy. So they withdrew the idea and they did a little pilot project. And then Yeager went off and did his study. And it's called the mature asset strategy. And it's another way for the government to pay for the industry's old wells. I mean, that's what
Right.
it amounts to. And so what Dwight is arguing is that Dave Yeager is in a conflict of interest because he led the process to come up with this mature asset strategy, which the AER will now implement. And he should not be on the board. He should recuse himself, or the premier should take him off the board
Right.
if the AER is going to be pursuing this strategy. So that's the crux of the story. And now we'll wait for the ethics commissioner to make his decision.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's a fascinating way of watching how the government is obfuscating and getting around and trying not to, you know, take care of what they should be taking care of, which is all of these inactive wells.
Well, let's, any Albertans who are watching this should be frightened because until I did the unethical oil series, I had no idea how bad the problem was. I mean, these 80,000 wells, I wouldn't say they're the tip of the iceberg because they're a
Yeah,
big part of the problem, but there are another 155,000 marginal wells that are coming right behind them. These are wells that make 10 barrels a day or less, and they're, is in the very near future, they're going to have to become inactive wells that should be cleaned up.
yeah.
Um, so there was an AER presentation that was leaked. It was from 2018, where a group of AER employees, led by a fellow named Robert Wadsworth, investigated what the unfunded environmental liabilities is what they're called. And on the conventional side, it was about estimated to be $130 billion. On the oil
Wow.
sands side, it was estimated to be another $130 billion. Now that was, 7 years ago. So I think inflation and so on, we can round it up to $300 billion quite easily. Plus there was other stuff that wasn't included in the report. And so whatever. I mean, it's hundreds of billions of dollars
Yeah.
and no plan to ever clean this up. So if we're right here at Energy Media, we think the International Energy Agency has got it right, that we're going to have peak oil demand in 2029 and then a decline. So if the Alberta industry gets into trouble 5 to 10 years down the road, and it just, bankrupt companies and throwing more of their assets become orphan wells or liabilities. This is a problem that there may not be a solution for. We may be stuck holding all these dirty old wells, some of them leaking
Yeah.
methane or leaking other things. Uh, it's a the problem is so big that it's hard to get your head around it. And so this is a little insight into that much bigger problem, which we'll probably be doing some more videos on as over the next 3 to 6 months. So maybe we should leave it at that because it just is such a big topic. We could talk all day about it.
Well, it's a perfect segue into what I wanted to talk about next, which you called a gong show, and the government is calling the Alberta Next panels, which are, public consultations, which, have basically, I don't know if you would call them rallying points for UCP or what we would call them, but basically talking about these panels that have, maybe are not working in the public's best interest.
The UCP government under Danielle Smith appoints these panels to go out and listen to people.
Yeah,
And they're ridiculous. I mean, they're not consultative panels in the way that we, traditionally think of the government listening, doing town halls and getting feedback from voters. I mean, these are, you know, the topics of some of them. One of them was anti-vax, and the people they had on the anti-vax panel were so discredited and just conspiracy theorists and all sorts of things that nobody gave it any credibility at all. And this next one is a bit of an odd thing because there are people on there who do have credibility. People like Professor Trevor Tome was the one I mentioned in the video. And so there have been two of these panels done, and they've become fairly rowdy affairs, because people who don't agree, uh, go and protest and ask uncomfortable questions. Well, they were cutting people off with the mic, and they were, the second one. I can't remember whether it was the first one that they did this, but they made the tickets available to UCP members, so to make sure that very no or very few uh, protesters might
opposing.
get access. And so there's no value to this. And I worry people like, Professor Tome, he lends credibility to what it appears to be uh, a process that has no credibility. And the UCP have done this. They did it under Jason Kenney. Albertans will remember the paneling public inquiry into anti-Alberta energy campaigns, right? Led by Steve Allen, which was another, it wasn't a public inquiry. It doesn't have public meetings, but
Yeah.
still was not I think, a credible process uh, into foreign funded activists. So this is the way the government, the UCP governments have operated. And I don't know what to say because they're going to keep operating like this. They basically put together a panel, make sure they get to hear the message they wanted to hear, and then
Yeah.
they issue or they use it as justification to do what they wanted to do anyway. I mean, it's just blatant, political gerrymandering. So,
Well,
yeah,
I
we
mean,
had a few to say about it.
I think it's a bit of a wake up call around what democracy looks like in Canada. Like, I mean, maybe not in Canada, but what democracy is looking like under Daniel Smith, because these public consultations aren't really public consultations like people think of them. And some people who might not be paying close attention might think, oh, they're doing consultations about that. Okay, my community and people who've got time are there, and they're getting the word in, and I'm just a busy mom. I can continue on with my life, and someone else in my community is taking care of it. So I I found that kind of a bit of a wake up call.
Well, we should point out, I mean, it's not like other governments in Alberta and outside of Alberta don't do this kind of thing.
Yeah,
But, they appoint panels and then they appoint friendly people to the panels. I mean, it's that the UCP is just so blatant about it. Smith
yeah,
is just so blatant. She just doesn't care. And and she also doesn't care what the public thinks of the panels that she appoints, like the anti-vax panel,
yeah.
you know. And she has these, and she'll stand up in a press conference and say, "Well, I just want to hear what people think. I mean, if they think crazy anti-science conspiracy theories, I just want to hear that." That's not the way we're used to having government run. And
Mm-hmm.
and it's indicative of how the Smith government runs, in my opinion. I mean, we're in the energy space. We talk to a lot of people, energy experts, and people inside and outside the government. And uh, one of the things that is apparent is that politics plays an enormous role in, let me back up, political staff as opposed to expert staff
Yes.
play a much bigger role in drafting policy and drafting reports and so on than you might think. So, I mean, this is an intensely political government. It does things for, and then it sort of jigs or rigs is maybe the better word, rigs the process to make it look like it has, expert support from people, from regulators and so on. But really, it's driven by politics and by political staff, and so you get poor outcomes as a result. So anyway, that's what the Alberta Next panels are all about.
Well, and I think we've covered the last thing I want to talk to you about today was pipelines, because we've been covering pipelines quite a bit in the last few weeks. And we're talking about this this has not been about facts. This is about a political narrative, really. And I was just wondering if you could update us on where we're at with pipeline, should I say pipeline politics or pipelines in Canada? What's your
Well,
take on
pipeline
that?
politics, the reason we're talking about a pipeline is because of Donald Trump.
Yes.
And he put tariffs on Canada, and he talked about annexing Canada, and occasionally it pops up again. Trump the most isn't the smoothest, and he doesn't always remember things, but every once in a while it'll pop up. And so Canadians are mad, and they're determined to do things differently. So Prime Minister Mark Carney comes in and he says, "All right, we're gonna eliminate trade barriers east and west." So between the provinces, so we're gonna build our domestic market for domestic manufacturers, domestic services. All of that is great. And then we're also going to the second part of this is strategy, is to export more of our things to Europe and Asia
Right.
instead of sending it down to the south. Well, this is an opportunity. It's manna from heaven for the oil and gas industry because they've wanted to expand oil sands production for a long time. Premier Smith has said, well, we want to double oil production, which would mean from like 4 million barrels a day to 8 million barrels a day, which would be a huge, enormous increase. And uh, and the numbers that the pipeline proponents, to the extent that they ever use numbers, they're taking it right out of the OPEC playbook.
Yeah.
And that's, the modeling there is called the World Oil Outlook. And then the alternative to that, it's almost like the anti-OPEC view, is the International Energy Agency, which says OPEC says oil growth of 17 million barrels a day out to 2050. IEA says peak oil demand by 2029,
2029.
4 years
Yeah.
away, 4 years away, and then decline probably starting in the early 2030s. The IEA uh, modeling, its vision of the energy future, would be a disaster for Alberta if
Yeah.
if it started building pipelines. So what we've been asking for is say, where's the business case, and how will the business case handle risk factors?
Yes.
Right? So climate policy is a risk factor. Declining demand is a risk factor. Changes in the markets that Canada wants to get into, like China, India, and Europe. In China, we saw the IEA actually declare uh, peak oil demand this year or next year
Yes.
at the late. It's coming quicker and quicker because what's happening is China is electrifying its transportation sector so quickly that demand for oil is dropping, and the increase that's coming from more petrochemical production is basically they're canceling each other out, and that's not what OPEC modeled. OPEC thinks that the demand for petrochemical will grow so much that there will be increased demand in China, not less demand. And
Right.
so the facts on the ground are not supporting the Canadian oil industry's narrative.
Yeah.
And what we've just been asking is, my God, can we not have a discussion based on data and evidence?
Exactly.
Instead of all these stories about, you know, I I won't name the professional, but I had somebody that I interview all the time, and this happened off camera. So I'll just give you the vague outlines. But, we were talking about this, and I said, well, there's real problems with this. Where's all the oil going to go? And this person said, China. It
Yeah.
was just like, and they come from Calgary, and they're just embedded in that narrative. And it never occurred to them. They went China. I went, no, no, dude. There's a very good chance it won't be China. That's what the evidence says.
Yeah.
And it was like, they were startled. Like,
Yeah.
no one
Or
ever
the
questioned.
global south. I mean, people also think that the demand for oil in the global south is going to increase. And, we're seeing, people like Cherry Brand and these other EVs opening new dealerships and expanding and exporting to the global south, where I think there's going to be more electrification than has been, predicted. Or even, people like you're talking about, they're not thinking about that, they're not thinking about, oh, instead of increasing oil, they might actually build for the future.
Well, there's a problem here. It's a narrative problem, and it's a perception problem. Because if I'm a Canadian and I hear us talking like this, uh, the next logical question is, well, don't the oil and gas CEOs know this? Like they have
Right.
traders that work at the international level, the big companies, like Suncor and Cenovus. They have people who in their economics departments who track, signposts, and they track the data.
Yeah.
How could the oil and gas CEOs be this out of touch? Well, I don't know if this is the case, and so dismissive of the IEA, by the way. I mean, they basically everyone's calls it a political organization now and dismisses its work when it, in my opinion, it's far more accurate than OPEC. And just 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, Haytham El Guy, the OPEC Secretary General, was in Kananaskis at the Global Energy Show, and he said the best guide to oil's future is oil's past, and it's been growing rapidly ever since 2000. And he said that growth is just going to continue into the future. That's the silliest statement I've ever heard. I
Yeah.
mean, you know, it's going to grow because it is going to grow in the future because it grew in the past. Well, electrification of transportation, oil demand by ground transportation is 45% of all oil demand. So if you're replacing electric vehicles you're replacing internal combustion engine vehicles with electric vehicles, and you do it at the scale China's doing it, and then you export all that technology out to the global south. So they're, electrifying their transportation sectors. You can't say in good conscience that the oil demand you saw over the last 25 years is going to continue out for the next 25 years. It's a bizarre statement. And yet he said it at a public event, and everybody just went, "Yep, yep, we agree with that." And
Well,
that kind of single-minded uh, dedi uh, uh, dedication to a narrative scares the hell out of me. How are we making policy and making investment decisions on this kind of a worldview? It boggles the mind.
yeah, and I mean to make the argument that OPEC is apolitical or not political is also, is naive. Obviously, they've got a big political narrative and something that they're pushing along their members as well. So I, I would also take that and think, you've got to reflect on where they're coming from and why maybe they're trying to push this narrative of 2050.
Well, and the Saudis are particularly interesting because they're pouring tens of billions of dollars into things like solar farms
Yeah,
and hydrogen plants and materials. They've got this. I'm going to be doing. I made a contact at this company called SABIC, SABIC, which is 70% owned by Saudi Aramco,
yeah,
and they do a lot. It's petrochemicals and plastics and chemicals, and they're building a lot of that because they're kind of talking out of both sides of their mouth. On the one hand, they're building out their materials manufacturing capacity, so non-combustion, non-fuel use of oil, and they're also building alternative energy, basically electric technologies like China and Europe are doing.
yeah.
So they're doing that in the background. And at the same time, publicly, they're talking about how oil is going to go on forever. Their actions don't match their
Yeah, I'm
words.
sorry.
And it's almost like we're not smart
Was
enough to
it
figure
like
it out.
I restarted the
Yeah.
server?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot more to say about this, and I think we'll be covering it for quite some time. So, I mean, I think we'll wrap it up here. I just want to thank everyone again this week for liking and subscribing to our channel. We've had a few new members come on board this week, so I'm really excited that people are seeing value and supporting our channel and are liking the work that we do, and specifically, how you do it, Markham. I have to say that. And yeah, I just ask people to please subscribe to the channel and share our videos with your friends and through your own networks. I think that that's probably the best way to watch this grow and watch grow this conversation, hopefully changing the narrative in Alberta and Canada like.
Yeah, I'll just close out by saying that, I'm going to be on vacation for the rest of the week, hanging out on beaches with my grandkids. So, the quantity of our journalism will probably be a little less this week, but we'll be back next week in our you know, so, regular cycle. And so, bear with us this week, and we'll see more of you next week.
Oh, we all deserve a break. So enjoy your vacation and then get lots of cuddles from those grandkids, Marco.